She's having a little nippy napper. Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Here we are. Okay, well, hello everyone. We are so excited to be here with you today for our first episode of Gather, the podcast. This is your host, Natalie.
And this is Courtney. We're so excited.
We are just thrilled to finally be here. It's been a labor of love getting to this first podcast.
It really has. But this is a huge milestone, which is where I think today feels so special and exciting. We're pumped.
We are so pumped. We've problem-solved microphone issues. Well, solve is a generous term for it, but we have microphones.
Yes. We have gotten 2 solutions to get to where we're at, which is awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's just take a moment to help you all get to know us, your hosts, a little bit better.
Yeah, we thought it would be fun to start with a little icebreaker. Like, we'll get into the meat and potatoes in a minute, but, you know, just as we are starting a podcast, you know, we know who we are. You know, everybody who knows us listening knows who we are, but, you know, hopefully we have people joining who are new to get to know us.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, we have a couple, questions to ask each other.
Okay, so our first one, if you could spend the day with a famous woman, who would it be?
So I would spend the day with Jacinda Ardern. She is the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I love her. I think she is such a great example of leading through empathy and strength and womanhood, and just such a great example to women, to young girls. I actually heard that she just got into Harvard for a fellowship.
Amazing.
Which is so cool. And I think just the way that she's balanced life and her family and her career is admirable. I'd love to pick her brain and spend some time with her.
She has been amazing to watch because she's taken on these huge leadership roles, but then not been afraid to just say, okay, that was my time in that role, and now it's time for me to evolve and move forward and pass the baton, which I think you don't see as often.
No, she's got such good boundaries, which is amazing, and a really hard thing to do when you are working to build your career.
We love boundaries.
In politics, which yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So she's amazing.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
What about you?
Oh gosh. Okay, so if I were to spend the day with one famous woman, I would want to spend it with Sue Johansson. And, you know, it's funny because I feel like a lot of people don't know who Sue Johansson was. Unfortunately, she passed away last year. But she was a nurse from Canada, and she was really passionate about sexual education. And so she actually started first a talk radio show to do sex ed, to kind of normalize what it means to be sexual beings, right? And then it gained a lot of traction, and she actually started kind of a late night television show where this, you know, middle-aged woman would go on and have these sex toys and talk about different sex acts and really work to inform the community about what is sex, how do we do it in a safe, consensual, healthy way, and you know, really eliminate some of the shame around a lot of it. And so she has absolutely been a pioneer of sexual education, and I think it's just would be so interesting to chat with her and hear her story of why did you choose that route to go versus your traditional sexual education, and just to hear her kind of look back on her career and the impact she's had on people.
Yeah, especially as a pioneer too, because making those decisions when they aren't normalized is really difficult. So to hear her strength and kind of some of the challenges she had to overcome would be really cool.
Oh, certainly. I sometimes try to imagine how much pushback she must have been getting in the mid-90s, early 2000s.
Can you imagine? No.
She's like, yes, I'd like to bring this large dildo on the television and talk to people about it. So Sue Johansson is my gal. That's who I would go for.
I love that.
Okay.
Okay, well, second question. What is a fear or insecurity you have or are trying to overcome?
Oh, you mean like in addition to doing a podcast? I mean, I think very much in line with that, even though, I am kind of joking. It's very vulnerable. And I think that for myself, a fear that I think is an ongoing process of overcoming is just the more that I become authentically myself and really give myself the space and grace to show up exactly as I am, allowing myself to be accepted by others. I think there's a big fear that if I am 100% who I am, that maybe people will reject me.
Yeah.
And I think that, in all honesty, yeah, sure, some people will. But the more that I've really pushed myself to just be open and be myself and stand in as much alignment as is possible, right? There's always social taboos that don't allow for everything. But people have been very accepting and really warm and loving the more you show up as yourself. So I think that's a fear that I'm working through, and I probably will continue to work through for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I know that's a hard one, and I think most of us have, elements of working through that, because it's a really hard thing to feel like you're like not being accepted, but also like getting to the point like personally, because I have also dealt with that too, where it's like, it's okay to not be accepted by everybody. And if I'm not, then, those people will find people that they jive with and get along with. And I personally will find my people.
Absolutely.
And, like, it's okay to not jive with everybody.
Oh, yeah. And, I think that, in the past, maybe it was something like, oh, Natalie, you're too much, you're too loud, you're too whatever, you know.
As we are told as women.
Oh, yeah, always. Yeah. Oh, you're too funny. How are you so funny? You're a woman. Ha. Yeah. No, but realizing that those just aren't my people.
Yeah.
And that's okay, too.
Totally.
How about for you? What is a fear or insecurity that you are working on?
Yeah. Well, I feel like a fear that I have that's like on a lighter note, sharks. I have a really hard time swimming in open bodies of water, and I'm just like constantly afraid that there's like going to be a shark. And I have swam in the ocean multiple times and seen sharks. So I think like the reality of a shark to me is like very real and very present, to the point where I get very scared for my family to swim in the ocean too. My most irrational fear, I've like gotten through this, but like whenever I would like, if the shower was so cold, the water was so cold, if I like closed my eyes, I would like picture a shark coming out of the shower head. Like, so irrational.
Oh no.
I know. So I used to be very, very, very afraid of sharks. I have a very healthy respect for them. I love them. But
it does sound like maybe some exposure therapy could be
maybe. I don't know.
Like, what are those statistics? Like, you're more likely to like die from a vending machine falling on you than a shark attack.
I know, but I'm like, you're saying there's a chance. And I think the scary part with the shark is that it's not that you would die. It's that you would like be a victim of a shark attack. Like, that scares me. And
I mean, arguably very terrifying.
Very scary. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's like a little more lighthearted. But definitely.
Hey, I'm talking about land-based shark attacks, and you're talking about water-based shark attacks.
And I like have this irrational fear that maybe people like release sharks into lakes sometimes. So if I like go boating or swim in a lake, a shark's gonna be there. Oh,
no, it's just the tiger muskies you have to worry about.
I'm scared of those too. Oh man. But as far as like insecurities, I think, just accepting myself and like loving myself for who I am and being able to draw boundaries with, people and be able to say no and say, no, like it's okay. It's okay to say no to things, and it's okay to stand in my power. And, if I don't want to do something, or, I mean, even something small, it's like, oh, like if I have plans already, but there's like a dinner that's being planned with someone else, being able to say like, hey, no, like, I don't need to make everybody happy.
Yeah.
So those are things I've been working on.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great point with the saying no, because I do feel like, and I don't know if this is unique to, moving through the world as a woman or just as a human, but like we tend to want to say yes to everything.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this fear of missing out.
And do it 100% perfect too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it better than anybody's ever done it, because I'm going to be the best at carrying the groceries in from the car all at once, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like just taking on so much. And, I think that's something that will also be a constant life lesson for me too, is just finding that balance of, I have so many things I'm interested in doing. Yeah. I want to participate in all these different aspects of my life, but what can I do and what do I have the capacity for?
Yes. Yeah, and I think along those lines, for me, really learning, like, good is better than perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yes.
Good is better than perfect, and that's okay sometimes, especially when we have so much on our plates and there's so much we're trying to get done. Like for me, it's like trying to be a mom and our house and a wife and a really good employee and great at what I do for my people at work, and like, it's like you always do, like we have so much on our plates, plus you're trying to like take care of yourself and like take a shower once in a while and like
like drink some water.
Yeah, literally I have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. I think there's that old saying, like, plenty is enough.
Yeah.
Like it's plenty enough. Like you don't have to have everything.
Yeah.
All the time.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I loved that question.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So hopefully that's given you all a little idea of who we are and our personalities, but we'd also like to share with you more about kind of our backgrounds, how we got here, and just a little bit more detail about us. So I'll go first. So again, I'm Natalie, and I am a pelvic health physical therapist. I specialize in treating folks of all genders for bowel, bladder, and sexual dysfunction. And really, it's been from a pretty early age that I've really enjoyed and been drawn to this analysis of like organizations and systems and society and how that creates human behavior and human experiences, which ultimately led me to study sociology in undergrad. And during that time, I volunteered as a rape victim advocate at the Rape Recovery Center and ended up doing that for like 12 years afterwards, which has really informed just like my perspective on life and the way that I approach what I do now as a pelvic health physical therapist. But after I received my bachelor's in sociology, where I kind of focused more on gender inequity and gender-based violence, I thought that I was going to become a sociology professor because I was like, this is my jam. I love this. I love talking about society and, trying to dismantle systems and come up with policies. But I realized that path was kind of removed from actually interfacing with humans. That was just a lot of research. And so I went through a circuitous path, came back to Utah, and ended up becoming a Pilates instructor and getting my full certification through Stop Pilates, which is where I discovered that I actually am a total nerd for anatomy and the human body and the way that the body works. And so through that kind of path of becoming a Pilates instructor, I ended up stumbling upon physical therapy and decided to pursue my doctor of physical therapy, and through that training fell in love with pelvic health PT because it really is just this like beautiful, unique blend of patient advocacy. I get to provide a lot of education on, harken back to Sue Johansson, sex, all these pelvic functions that are traditionally very taboo in our society. And then just like have the pure joy of being a part of patients' journeys to getting back to the lives that they want to live. And so that is kind of what I do professionally. Non-professionally, I am now a contractor because I bought a house and am remodeling the entire thing largely on my own with some help. And so if you're ever looking for me, I'm either in the clinic or I'm at my house tearing down walls.
Which you are phenomenal at both. It's been really cool to see you go through that journey and like be there with you. And we'll talk about this a little bit and like how long we've known each other and our friendship, but being able to see your journey and going from pursuing sociology, moving to pursue that, and then coming back and getting your Pilates instructor certification. And I remember when you got accepted into PT school, like just such a magical journey, and like so cool to see, because it has had such ups and downs and difficult times, and like, where am I going next? But you reflect back on it and it's like, wow, like all of those experiences have made you the most incredible human being that you are today.
That is so kind. And I think it's just that fact that life is not linear.
No,
I really, really believed when I was
it's
younger.
been like a full sinusoidal wave.
I was like, I go from A to B and then it's over. And it's like, no, actually, it's a spiral. And sometimes it looks like a staircase. And other times you're like, I don't even know where I am right now.
It looks like a jumbled mess.
You're in a black hole, and here we are.
I know. Well, a little bit about me. So I'm Courtney. I am a mom of 2 amazing children. I recently had my second within the last 7 months. And I love being a mom. It's like one of my favorite things on the whole planet. It gives me so much joy. It's insanely difficult a lot of times, but it's so rewarding and so much fun. And I just love my relationship with my kids. I've been married, coming up on my 11-year anniversary, which is wild. I'm like, that's more than a decade. I went to school, talk about
circuitous path.
Yeah. I went to school for acting and pursued an acting career and for several years. And it was actually going really well, but it really caused me to struggle mentally and how I valued myself, how I saw myself. And I really enjoyed acting, but because of that, I decided to make a change for my own personal happiness and my own mental health. Still love acting, but it's just really hard for me. And I know it's not for others, but through that, I've pushed to have a career in business and in sales. And so over the last about a decade, have been in sales, leadership, and currently in staffing and the healthcare industry. And so, through learning and growing in my career, I've been fortunate and so grateful to be in leadership. And I've really found my passion there and being able to support my people that I lead. And it's been just amazing. Like the team that I lead right now and that I lead with other leaders, I've been on for about 6 years, and I work with the best people in the industry. Like my team is amazing. I know that there's, it's like, like people saying you have a work family. It's just trying to get you to like overlook all the bad. No, they're like genuinely a work family, care about you. I mean, I've, been through a lot since being there. And I mean, people show up for each other. I mean, I have people who have like brought me macaroons, gift baskets, and like, I mean, just the support that you get there. It's just truly incredible. So I've been really fortunate to have an amazing career. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, and I think to your point earlier about watching each other move through these professional endeavors is, I've really learned so much watching you over the last 10 years pivot from acting to business.
Yeah.
And not only like just to business, but to being a leader within your field, and the way that you really emphasize building culture and building community, and how important that sense of belonging and creating that sense of belonging for the people around you has been in what you do and with your success. And I think that really shines through in all aspects of your life too.
Thanks. It really is such an important thing, and that's where people thrive. When you create community and you care about the people you work with, like genuinely care, it really makes a huge difference. And I think that's the reason we also want to do the podcast, is being able to create community around, we'll go into some of the topics that we'll talk about, but being a woman and trying to find and advocate for yourself in the healthcare system and navigate your own health and just
know that you're not alone.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to like a really natural segue into like, how did we become friends? What is our relationship, right? Because I think that community, that sense of belonging and that support has been a huge theme for us throughout our entire friendship.
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to meet in 7th grade.
I know.
Lucky
when
being
so much is happening in your life.
like we're going through puberty.
I know.
We're learning about all these things and
trying to find who you are, navigate new friendships.
Oh, yeah.
And
Middle school.
Just, yeah.
You couldn't pay me to
Middle
go
school.
back.
No.
But it was really in our English class that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we started sitting next to each other and we became friends and, you know, we just connected and we were able to start this friendship of sharing with each other
Yeah.
at a pretty young age, which I think is really cool and unique.
And something I think has been really unique and special about it is like being able to grow together.
Mm-hmm.
Being friends since middle school, like early middle school.
Over 20 years of friendship.
Over 20 years of friendship, and be able to like grow and like just step into our personalities and who we are and support each other through so much change is really unique and special. Like, it's been really cool to be able to be there for each other as we've gone through so much.
So much. Really, really fun, great, positive things, really, really challenging,
Right.
devastating experiences, and just kind of the mind scramble that is life.
Yeah.
Right? And kind of being redirected every step of the way. It's been so reassuring to know that you're here and that you're this constant in my life. And even though, like any friendship, right? Like, sometimes we're seeing each other every week and other times we're seeing each other once every 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Because life changes.
Yeah.
But that ability to reconnect and come back together and always know that we have each other as a support system is priceless.
Yeah, as a foundation for each other.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that back to your point, that's really a big part of why we want to do this podcast, because as we have moved through life and gone through these difficulties and shared these successes, you know, having that sense of belonging with one another and being able to just say like, hey, Courtney, I had this experience. Is that normal? Like, have you had that before? Is something going on with me? And being able to normalize a lot of just what we move through as women, especially in like that, you know, middle school, high school, early 20s, moving into the 30s.
Yeah.
A lot of changes.
And being able to have someone who just accepts you, like, come as you are.
Yeah.
Like, seeing you for who you are, being able to be your fullest, authentic self, even going through challenging situations that life presents.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I even remember, like, 7th grade. It was, like, really challenging. And,
Yeah, it was.
You know.
It's like everything you're going through is always the hardest thing you've ever gone through.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Until you get to be a little bit older. And then all of a sudden you have this spectrum where you're like, okay, on the scale of what I've been through so far, where does this register? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about why gather.
Yeah. So I think, you know, something important to address is like some of the fears that have held us back getting to this point, because Gather, this podcast, this dialogue that we've wanted to create has been something we've wanted to create for a long time, like years. And I think, you know, it is important to address, okay, what has held us back in getting like so far and why now? But yeah, let me ask you that. And I think you touched on it a little bit in, you know, that initial question of what are some of your fears and insecurities, but, you know, what are some of the fears that have held us back?
Yeah, I think back on the past 6-7 years and how we've really had a lot of these conversations ongoing, right? And we have felt like, gosh, we feel this sense of validation in having these conversations. And then we started to talk about, oh, maybe this is something we want to share with more people. Mm-hmm. But having those fears of, is what we have to say important enough? And we're about to get really vulnerable. And what happens if people don't like it? What if we get rejected doing this? Like, what if the feedback is really negative, right?
And if it is, then I think that's the opportunity where we've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, well, then we'll take it and learn and grow and adjust. But we feel very passionate about, speaking to this and creating a podcast. So we're like, okay, we're just going to do it. And if we get rejected, we get rejected, and that's okay.
Yep. Yeah. And I think you make a great point of, I think we're finally at the place where, one, life has allowed us the time to do this, but also the kind of, not to be that way, but like the universe is really telling us it's time. Yeah. And we feel so passionately and so invigorated about these topics pertaining to women and difficulties that women are experiencing, and recognizing that what we have to share is important and it is valuable, and it doesn't have to be packaged perfectly. Like, it comes back to that, like, plenty is enough. Yeah. Right?
Good is better than perfect. And I think, too, something that we've talked about a lot is we really want this to be a high quality thing, something that feels meaningful to others and meaningful to us. And we also don't want it to diminish the experiences of women. And so I think, having that weight of, okay, we're speaking to these things. Are we doing it justice? Are we coming with our fullest selves? Are we presenting the full story and unbiased and considering different experiences, backgrounds, and allyship even? And that's been a big thing that we've had to consider and think about as we, jump into this.
Certainly. And I think, getting to this point of really sitting down, buying the equipment, mapping out these episodes, and recording a podcast really has come from that we have been able to share these fears with each other, that we've been able to share a lot with the people in our lives who we care about and who love us and support us, and realizing that this is important. And we feel very passionate about normalizing these experiences that women have throughout the life course that we have experienced, but also ones that we haven't ourselves experienced but want to bring light to.
Yeah. And I think, that next, like, conversely, how did we get to this point of starting the podcast that we've kind of been going over is, like, our friendship has been one where we've normalized our experiences and discuss what we're going through, which has been so helpful to feeling secure in who we are and what we're going through and being able to just talk through things. But it was really when, we had this experience where we felt invigorated to do something, and we couldn't not do something after, We'll go into it, but just like some of the health experiences that we've kind of been going through.
Absolutely. And I think back to just recognizing that these are not unique experiences.
Right.
Right. And I think that really, Court, it was around the time, when you had your first child, right? And I'd love, if you feel comfortable, if you would just share with us a little bit about, what that experience was like. Because, at the time, I had just started physical therapy school.
Right.
I'm learning about, pathophysiology and all of these different illnesses and issues that can happen. And then, my best friend has her own experience. And I think it was a real wake-up call for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm absolutely, wanting to share. I think, we want this to be a vulnerable thing and be able to discuss these things so that we can normalize them. But yeah, when I had my first child, the delivery didn't go, as anticipated, which I would probably say that's the majority of women who have a baby, and having to navigate the healthcare system on my own in earnest for the first time, especially in particular through the postpartum experience. So when I delivered, I labored for 72 hours and it was just exhausting. And labor is just exhausting. Doesn't matter how long you labor. It is so exhausting, and women are so strong to be able to go through this. But my child was in the NICU, and that was a really mentally difficult thing, trying to navigate healing and being there for your child. And I think going through all of this, it was, okay, you have your baby, you just neglect everything else, and that baby is everything. Yeah. And so there was the mom baby unit and then there was the NICU, and they were two separate locations. And after, she was in the NICU, I was walking like 10,000 steps a day to get to mom baby from the NICU, back and forth, trying to sleep when you can, but wanting to be there to ensure like good care was being given, which it was. Like, we had incredible providers and nurses taking care of her, which was amazing.
But it makes a lot of sense that you'd have a lot of fear and anxiety around that. Like, you just delivered your first child. You've never done this before, and they're in the NICU, and I can only imagine that there's so much uncertainty there, and having that natural instinct to want to be there caring for her.
And I remember, so when I birthed her, she came out and she wasn't breathing and she was blue, and I thought she was dead, and they put her on my chest, and I didn't even react. I was just so in shock, and they hit the call button and everybody came in and they, had to intubate her, and it was just a very traumatic experience. And throughout that whole experience, and I'm sitting there unable to move because I have an epidural, and just watching this all happen, and I'm asking what's going on because I can't see. And everybody's like, "It's okay, everything's fine." And I was like, but it's not.
You're like,
but
I
can very clearly see, like, things are not fine.
Yeah.
Might they be okay? Yes. And she is strong and healthy now. But, like, at the time, you don't know that. And so, trying to navigate that too, and then this trauma of that experience, and trying to make sure she's okay. And so that was a lot.
It sounds like a lot. And I remember during that time, as from an outside perspective, seeing all of this happening, your brand new baby is in the NICU. You're trying to heal from delivery, and you're also navigating those stressors of brand new parenthood, right? It's a brand new experience. You've never done it before. And, there's just so much unknown about how your child is doing. And like you said earlier, you're probably not thinking so much about how you're doing because now all of your focus is on this little human that you've created, right? And so I would just love to hear, like, what was it like for you trying to navigate your own body during this time, and your health during the postpartum phase after this?
Yeah, I think, initially when, you're trying to, like, be in the NICU, be present, and technically you're discharged as a mom, but your child is not. Again, your focus isn't necessarily on you, and it's like, well, I'm not going to sit here and rest when I could be down with my baby and supporting them. But, I mean, we were very fortunate. We were only there for a week, which I'm very grateful for. I'm very grateful for the providers that took care of her, that took care of us. Like, it obviously could have been a lot worse. But after that and coming home, that's when I really started to lean into, okay, like, my postpartum recovery. How do I, like, once I knew she was okay and we were home, now let's start to take care of me.
Yeah.
And recover, which is something that people don't prepare you for.
Nobody really, like, tells you what to expect or talks to you about any of this, really.
No, they don't. And I feel like the wisdom and knowledge you get around postpartum care comes from other women in your life. Like, it didn't really seem like, I think now, and especially after having my second child, and I don't know if it's because I've gone through this experience before, or if it was, there's, like, things all over Pinterest now, on Instagram, and resources seem a little bit more abundant, but, like, even small things like perineal care.
Oh, yeah.
People don't talk about. My amazing aunt was the one who sent me, like, a care package of perineal care that I didn't even know I needed.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, like, these are the things I need. I need tucks, and I need...
Make padsicles.
Yeah, exactly. Like, all those things, like, you don't know you need until you need them. So I think the power of women in your life to support you is really incredible. And I was very grateful for that experience and for my aunt who did that for me.
But I think it also does identify, like, how are we maybe failing women by leaving it up to those community-based connections to be what's educating
because
you
what if
on
you
this?
don't have that community, or people haven't experienced those things or had the resources, and so you're just kind of like powering through or suffering through it. I mean, even like a peri bottle, like the things that you like fill up and like every time you go to the bathroom, it's like there's a lot that people just don't tell you. And so it's like, why aren't we providing those resources? And how can we do that? Like, how can we better support women as we go through these massive life changes? And why is it up to Instagram and Pinterest and you know, our community to tell us these things? Like, we should be finding those things in your care, medical care.
Well, and that's honestly where, just to like interject and put a little plug in for pelvic health PT, where I see pelvic health physical therapy being such an important resource for women, because if they are given referral to us, or, you know, it's suggested to a pregnant woman or even a woman before they're pregnant to come see a pelvic floor physical therapist, we do labor prep. We educate on all of these things. Like, we are providing that education. I didn't know about any of this stuff.
I didn't know about any of that stuff, and I was having a baby.
Yeah, like, I didn't know about it till I got my formal training, and then I was like, wait a minute. There needs to be like a whole master class on just how to prepare for labor, much less on how to like survive after delivery, right?
Right, exactly. Well, and I mean, this is a little off topic, but with my second delivery, I had an emergency C-section. Recovering from a C-section, 10 out of 10 would never do again. Like, I mean,
it's a major abdominal surgery.
Horrible. Like, I mean, horrible. And people don't talk about it. And I think they just expect you to be okay because everybody has C-sections and you're okay. But like, it was brutal. And even just resources to recover from a C-section are completely different. And I felt like, okay, I'm just kind of like learning as I go through this. And we had discussions around, okay, like, what are some tools you can do to, you know, support your postpartum recovery, including C-section scar massage, so that your tissues don't adhere to each other and you've got this like this massive scar. Like, how do you promote healthy healing? And those resources aren't really given to you.
They're not readily available. They're not promoted. And we're just essentially leaving women to learn as they go on some of the biggest medical experiences that we will ever have.
And sometimes after it's too late. Like, I mean, I don't know. Would a C-section scar massage help you a couple years later?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
100%. It is never too late. Everybody, I want to be here to give you hope. It's never, ever, ever too late.
Okay.
To work on anything in your body. Yes.
But it's hard because sometimes it feels that way.
Certainly.
You know, when you're like, is it too late? Have I like ruined something? Like,
or you just get so used to it that it becomes your new baseline, and you forget, oh, I didn't actually always used to have a lot of pain when I tried to like arch back, right? Or reach for something, or, you know, you name it.
Or even just sitting there and having this pain in your scar. Like, it just hurts.
Certainly.
But that's beside, so back to like how we started this podcast and like the whole scenario and situation. But yeah, so I was navigating like my postpartum experience now as a new mom with limited resources at the time, not knowing what was normal, what was not normal, having like a lot of uterine pain. But as anybody who's had a baby knows, it's like you just are in pain and you question what's normal, what's not normal. They tell you, oh, if like, you know, you have like a certain amount of bleeding or a fever to go back in. And so, you know, you kind of dismiss a lot of the pain because I didn't want to seem like a burden.
Yeah.
So I like didn't want to like continue to go back in and like be a burden on my physician, which is like kind of like bonkers thinking about it, like looking back at it now, because that's literally what they're there for. But, 3 weeks into my postpartum experience, I was just continuing to have like excruciating uterus pain and just powering through it. I mean, we were like going on hikes and walking because I was like, okay, maybe this is a mobility thing. I just need to get up and move and get blood flow. But yeah, 3 weeks after I delivered, I ended up like spiking such a high fever. And it was a weekend, because I remember I couldn't go into the clinic. And I like, when you get those like fever shakes, like I couldn't stop shaking. So I had to go into an urgent care. I called the after hours line and they were like, well, go to an urgent care. Like, and I went to this urgent care and, I was like shaking. Like they were like, "Do you want blankets?"
You're like clearly unwell.
And I was like pale. I was not doing okay. And so the urgent care physician was pressing on my belly, like, and I'm, explaining to him, I just had a child 3 weeks ago, and he was like, well, I think you have diverticulitis, and you need to go to the emergency room and get a CT scan because you have diverticuliculitis. And I was like, oh my God, okay. Like, so
That's terrifying.
Yeah. And so I called my husband and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is what's happening. Like this is really bad. Like,
because you're at the urgent care by yourself.
By myself.
Because you don't want to bring your new baby.
My 3-week-old baby into the urgent care, potentially the emergency room, to get her sick by whatever illness an adult has that she's had no exposure to before. And I'm nursing too. So it's like, I feel this constraint on, I don't even want to be away for too long and like get this care because I have to nurse my baby.
Absolutely.
Like, is she gonna be okay? Do I have enough milk stored up in the fridge? And so anyway, so I call my husband. I'm like, hey, I'm headed to the emergency room. So I head into the emergency room, and because the urgent care physician was like, tell them you have diverticulitis and that you need a CT scan. So I was like, okay. So I walk into the urgent care and they're like, hey, like, what do you need to be seen for? And I was like, hey, I just I went to the ER and I was like, hey, I just was at the urgent care and he said that I have diverticulitis and that I need a CT scan because they don't have a CT scanner at the urgent care. And they were like, okay, well, let's triage you.
Yeah.
And they get me back, and literally the triaging physician came back and was like belly laughing. She was like, okay, I think we have a couple other things that we can like, like you just had a child. Let's like navigate through this and rule a couple other things out before we jump into diverticulitis. Anyway, so, long story long, they start doing some, blood tests and blood work, and I had a whole body infection. I had sepsis, and I had this infection for several weeks.
Since you delivered.
Since I delivered, and had to be admitted to the hospital. And thankfully, I am okay, because that is a very, very scary thing. And I know people who have not come out on the other side of sepsis okay. Some people have, but I think, thankfully, I probably caught it, like, as soon as I went septic to get this help. And, I was there for, about a week again. But, it was just like this crazy experience of, how do we trust our bodies and know what's right and what's wrong and get the care we need? It's just and how quickly it can turn south.
Oh, and how terrifying to be trying to navigate all of these unknown symptoms. And, like you said earlier, you'd never been in a postpartum phase before. So
right.
Who's to say that it's not normal to have excruciating uterus pain
right.
and, all of this? Well, so terrifying that you ended up having sepsis and you're in the hospital by yourself so that your baby can be taken care of at home and not exposed to all of these,
right.
Illnesses that we all know come from being
right.
in a hospital setting. But I recall this time, and, this was really just the beginning for you, wasn't it? What happened next with postpartum?
Yeah, so I got better as far as the infection was concerned. And, after being discharged and like going about life again, trying to heal and like take care of myself, take care of the baby, try to figure out how to be a new mom. Like I continued developing these symptoms just like in my body around 6 months postpartum, it ended up getting to the point, like I had already returned to work and my joints were just hurting so bad. Like I remember sitting at my desk trying to type and my left pointer finger was just hurting so bad that I couldn't fully close my hand. And anytime I would type a key, it was just like the most excruciating pain. So I just typed without that finger and it was just so painful. And I was like, this just doesn't seem normal. Like none of this seems normal. And I used to think, I was like, oh, I must just need to like crack my finger. You know, like when your joint hurts really bad, you just like need to crack your finger and it makes it feel better. So I'd like think it was that and I would try to crack it and it would just make it worse and it wouldn't crack. And it was just so painful. I was also, meanwhile, developing symptoms of psoriasis and getting these patches all over my body. And those were very painful, not correlating the two. And so I was like, okay, I have to go see a physician and get this looked at. Like, and to me, I'm like, okay, this is no longer an OB issue, right? Like, I'm 6 months postpartum. Like,
you had your
like,
6-week checkup. They already said you're good to go. Fine. You never need to come back, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I went to my family practice doctor, and I hadn't been seeing anyone up until this point. So I like hadn't had like a specific family practice doctor that I had established care with.
Yeah.
So I went in to see a new physician.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you're transitioning from your OB managing your care, you go in and establish care with a new physician.
Yeah.
And, I remember this time, and I remember you sharing a lot of these symptoms with me, and I was like, I have no idea. I'm like 1 semester into PT school. I was like, I don't know what to tell you, but definitely go talk to somebody. Yeah. And I remember you, going in and chatting with the new provider and this being the main focus. So, with you going in and sharing all these symptoms, what was the plan that you came up with your provider?
Right. Yeah. So I was sharing all of these symptoms, like sharing like all of the skin symptoms. I was sharing the joint symptoms. It was like the bottom of my feet. I could barely walk in the mornings. Like they were so painful. And essentially, he was like, oh yeah. And then he said, well, welcome to motherhood. And my jaw just hit the floor. I was like, no, like not just welcome to motherhood.
Like,
and like, yes, motherhood is exhausting. Like you're not sleeping and you're really tired and your muscles ache because you're holding a baby like 100% of the time. So like, yes, that is exhausting. And I certainly do not want to diminish that. But these symptoms that I was having, I was like, well, don't we at least want to find out?
Like, not to mention the invalidating nature of just saying, welcome to motherhood. Like, not even, like, taking a moment to be like,
wow, that really sucks.
And, like, hey, yeah, that's, like, unusual, and I'm so sorry you're dealing with this.
You shouldn't be in pain all the time.
Just like, well, welcome to motherhood. Next.
Literally. And so, I mean, it literally caused me to sit there, and I did have this jaw-dropping moment where I was like, am I crazy? Maybe this is just me? Like, and I remember I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like lean into my gut, and what my gut is telling me something is wrong, and something didn't seem right. So I said, okay, well, could it be anything else?
Any chance it's anything other than motherhood?
And he said, well, how much are you sleeping? And then started asking me, postpartum depression questions and asking like how I was doing, which is good. Yeah. Like he should be doing that. That is appropriate. But I wasn't exhibiting any of those symptoms. I wasn't on, the rating they give you for the postpartum depression. I wasn't at risk. And so, he was like, well, it just seems like this is, being a really like a difficult time. Yeah, I think you are probably exhausted, like dealing with being a new mom. And I essentially was like, okay, well, can we at least do some blood work? Like, can we do some tests? Like, potentially, is it my thyroid? Like, it just seems like things aren't right. And if we do those tests, then and nothing comes back, okay, like
You'll work on your sleep hygiene.
Maybe I'll work on my sleep hygiene.
You and the baby's sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow. I just want to pause for a second and acknowledge that this is not how it should go, right? No matter what your symptoms are, no matter what pre-existing condition you have, aka motherhood, going on, like, you should be taken seriously, right?
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense why you'd be questioning whether it's real or not. But knowing you and knowing you since 7th grade, it doesn't surprise me in the least that you went in and you trusted your intuition and you advocated for yourself and were able to, convince him to begrudgingly order you some tests to see like what else is going on.
Well, yeah, and it really felt that way. Like when I was asking for these things, I had to ask for blood work. And like, I'm not a physician, so sure. Like, I don't understand all the things, or many things as it comes to medicine. But, it just seems like, getting blood work done when you're having odd symptoms should be like kind of maybe a first line of defense. Like, let's just see what's going on.
Yeah,
like
pretty standard, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he was also, with all of the skin issues that I was dealing with, kind enough to refer me to a pediatric dermatologist.
Because as a grown woman, you should totally see a pediatric dermatologist.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I asked him after he made the referral, I was like, she's a pediatric dermatologist. And he was like, oh, but you'll be fine. She's really good at what she does. Which I'm sure she is. Like, I'm sure she's a great pediatric dermatologist. Like, I'm sure she is. But
you are not a pediatric patient.
No, and I went and saw her, and she also kindly dismissed all my symptoms.
I roll.
Yeah.
roll. Like, in isolation, having like a skin concern and being referred to a pediatric dermatologist who is not the right person to be seeing you for your complaints, right?
Right.
And then being dismissed by said pediatric dermatologist is like incredibly frustrating and validating.
Yeah.
But then like you add that to everything else you're already experiencing at that time.
Right.
What was this like?
Yeah, it was a terrible experience. And what's more is around the same time my husband was experiencing some medical concerns of his own, like, again, as we all do. And I think this is why this is so important to talk about, because like this experience, I guarantee you probably 90% of listeners have had an experience where they have felt dismissed at some point during a medical exam.
Oh, yeah.
And he went to the same family practice doctor. And he came home that day and was like, wow, like, Court, you are not going to believe this. Like, you're going to be so mad. Like, look at these inequities. I just had the red carpet rolled out for me. He proposed blood work to be done. He looked at all of my symptoms with me. He immediately got me into an appropriate referring physician. He was like, we could even do x-rays, we could do a CT scan, like gave me all these options. And so it was at this point in which it became undeniable to me that there is a really real gender inequality in healthcare. And I do want to acknowledge that this is not all healthcare professionals. Like, throughout the course of dealing with this diagnosis, I have an autoimmune disorder. I received the diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis. I ended up getting into, I just found my own dermatologist through the recommendation of someone at work, actually. And he looked at me and he looked at my joints and he looked at my psoriasis and he was like, you need to get into a rheumatologist like yesterday.
Yeah.
Like, he was like, I will write you a referral. Like, if you can't get it, like, message me, I will get you a referral so you can get in immediately. And it's arthritis, like, it's not life-threatening, but I mean, it is serious, and I'm a young woman, like, dealing with these issues, and, so dealing with all of that, it does cause you to, when you have experiences like that, start questioning all the care you receive and the tests that are being done, the medicine you're being given, and to lose trust in the system at large. Because as I mentioned, like throughout my delivery, and I mean, I've had phenomenal physicians help me and practitioners and have had amazing care. But then conversely, when you have those experiences, it leads you to question all the care that you're getting.
Oh, yeah. Well, and especially when you're going through such a vulnerable and unknown time for yourself where it's scary. You're having these symptoms. You don't know why you're having them.
Right.
And they're debilitating you. You can't engage in your work. You can't care for your baby in the way that you want to. You can't care for yourself in the way that you want to. And I think you make a really great point, Courtney. Like, this is absolutely not an individual provider issue.
No.
This is a systemic issue. And, you know, these experiences are honestly symptoms of larger inequities in our society and pressures placed on medical providers for productivity. And, you know, everything has shifted away from this idea of like, let's meet patients where they are and provide high quality care to how can we maximize profits, right?
Yeah.
And I think then you layer on top of that the gender inequity that just arguably exists in our society, right? And how we know women's health concerns aren't taken as seriously. And you have a wonderful, not experience, but example of that, of the difference between you and your husband's care by the same provider, right?
And I think that was what was so unique about it, is it was the same person providing care to both of us, and the difference was just so glaring. And I didn't even bring it up with him. Like, my husband was the one, like, he was like, you're gonna die. Because like I'm obviously I talk a lot, and like I was talking to him about my experiences.
Of course.
How frustrating and invalidating it felt every time I went to the doctor, and you know, for him to have that experience and come home and be like, wow, like, this is not great.
Well, and to be on the receiving end of those, you know, covert and overt biases, that we all have biases, right? But to see how that came into action in the care that you were or were not provided, right?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when you're going through health scares, issues, or even things that are completely normal, like pregnancy, postpartum, a period, it can feel really isolating and leave you to question, does anyone else feel this way?
Yeah.
And like, I'm in no way saying, like, I like really want to reiterate, like, I'm not saying that my experience is special. Like, in fact, quite the opposite, that so many people face challenges in finding care being taken seriously, which is what has led us down this path of discussion and ultimately wanting to put a podcast together to discuss and bring light to these issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, the fact that your experience, it's not unique, right?
Right.
And that is the problem. We have all felt invalidated in seeking care and trying to get answers for our medical questions. And in us talking to each other and talking to other folks in our lives, realizing that this is happening more often for the women in our lives.
Right.
And recognizing too that like we talked about earlier, our healthcare system in the US is really siloed, really specialized. And, you know, because of that, you end up having to see providers for all of your distinct symptoms, even though all of those symptoms might be stemming from one source. Like for you, psoriatic arthritis. They send you to a derm, they send you to all these different people, but it's the arthritis that's causing your issues.
Right.
And, you know, generally providers aren't allowed the time or flexibility to collaborate on care. And there's, you know, having to see multiple providers is not necessarily a bad thing. It's great. We want people to be specialized. Right. But it's really that lack of communication and that collaboration that puts the burden on you as the patient to navigate and coordinate your own care.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think and at large, you know, these feelings of isolation or feeling siloed happen within our own health and healthcare. And so some of the things that we want to discuss.
Yeah. I mean, that experience is really what led us to being so committed and invigorated to starting a podcast, to starting these conversations on a larger platform.
Right. And open up the dialogue for others to share their story.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, anybody I've spoken to, or even talk about even the podcast, or even just health in general, like, probably 99% of women that I speak to is like, oh my gosh, well, I've got a story. Like, let me tell you about this.
Everybody has a story about it.
Yeah, exactly. And so some things that we are going to discuss in episodes on our podcast, we do want to discuss access to quality care, advocating for oneself in the healthcare system. And also, like, we hope that we will be able to bring on credentialed professionals to be able to give advice on like how to talk to these things. But I think like Natalie and I want to be very, very clear in disclaiming, like, we are not here to provide medical advice.
Certainly. We're here to create a safe and collaborative community where we can come together and share our stories and feel a sense of belonging and really problem solve as a community on how to try to make this better for everyone. And that includes men, women, people of all identities and backgrounds coming together and finding this solace and finding really an action to move forward.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. And so I think something else is like, how are the health needs of women different?
Absolutely.
You know, we don't really know because women have not been studied in a meaningful way in the context of health and healthcare. So we want to learn with our listeners about the distinct health needs of women through the life course and wanting to highlight people's experiences, learn from experts on the subjects we tackle, and open the dialogue.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think we're interested in kind of starting this in more of like a chronological way where we want to track these distinct health experiences in a woman's life course, starting with, you know, your first period and puberty and just moving all the way through to this postmenopausal phase, right? And, you know, like you said, Court, medical research has not been done on women in a way that informs medical care. And we're seeing more initiatives even just coming out from the White House to increase funding and to encourage this research because women are not receiving effective care many times. If we don't have the research to support it, how can we expect to provide good quality care? And, you know, on that note, I think we really want to identify and discuss the privilege that Courtney and I recognize that we have and how fortunate we've been in our backgrounds within healthcare to be able to advocate for ourselves and recognizing that, like, if we are having a hard time as people who are healthcare providers or work in healthcare industries getting the care that we need, we are empathetic to the fact that those who don't have this same background are likely having an even harder time even just getting into a provider and accessing care. And we just want to recognize that, you know, especially as white women with fairly high health literacy and knowledge of the healthcare system, that we have a unique perspective and we want to hear from other perspectives too so that we can.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. And hoping that in having this podcast will create a community to discuss these issues, a place for people to feel seen, to have the community, like I said, and not feel like you have to go it alone, a place where you can come and find solace or, you know, as I say this a lot, sunshine is the best disinfectant.
I love that.
Yeah. And so, you know, for things to get better, we need to talk about them. So whether you have experienced it yourself or know someone that has experienced feelings of isolation or having difficulty in having discussion around these topics or advocating for yourself, you know, we're really pushing to have this as a community and a safe space for those discussions.
Absolutely. And we are just so excited to have everybody here, and we are so open to feedback. And if you have things that you would like to hear about or discussions you would like to participate in or guests that you feel we should invite onto the show to talk with, please let us know. And thank you for taking the time to join us today on Gather.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you listened today and listened through the whole thing, like, gosh, like, so much gratitude for that. So I think we'll wrap it up and say thank you for gathering with us today.
And until next time.
Until next time.